Hey Stranger Things fans, I am bored now, and on this video I return to the world of Hawkins, Indiana in the 1980s and the Upside Down and Stranger Things. So this is going to be my review of Stranger Things 3 Chapter 1. It is called Suzie, Do You Copy? Full spoilers from the start of this review. And this sort of has like deja vu for me because I've actually reviewed this episode before when it first aired. I think I originally did the first two episodes of Stranger Things, the third season, a few years back, but I didn't get to complete the series at that point. So obviously I'm doing a full rewatch now, so I'm going to dive in. And this feels kind of similar to season 2, the start of season 2, where it takes a little bit of time setting things up. In a way, we sort of drop in with the characters a year after the events of season 2, and we just pick up with them and start to get to know where exactly they are at in their lives, with a little hint of the stuff which is going to be, you know, the sci-fi type stuff of the season, the sci-fi elements. And part of this season is going to be based around this sort of Cold War type plot, because we open actually the year before, 1984, June 1984, and we see a group of Russian scientists in a lab conducting experiments. It's all very high tech and fancy. There's like this massive wheel at some point with lights and sparks flying from it, and we see that they're experimenting on some sort of a creature, and the head scientist basically gets pissed when the experiment doesn't quite go to plan, and he's told 1 year from now we would have made contact. Now it's a little bit cartoony, the scene, but it does hit all the right basic beats. So that's the setup, and then we're going to go forward 1 year, which is 1985. And that's going to be the slow burning sci-fi plot of the season involving those scientists. So we pick up with the gang. We see that Mike and Al are still dating. They're getting closer than ever. They're starting to like sneak off to their room, or Al's room in this case, and kiss. And the show is sort of showing you the impact stuff like this has on not just, you know, like adults around them, but also their close friends. So Hopper is essentially Elle's father in this scenario, so he's starting to get a bit cheesed off with her and Mike spending so much time together kissing, and he's got like a door, like a rule, like a 3-inch rule, which obviously they start to push and start to break because they want to be alone. And Mike's pretty funny in the episode because he keeps, you know, lip syncing and singing along to these big rock style ballads. And the episode also shows Elle starting to use her powers in a more common everyday way, because in that opening bit with them, she uses the power to like shut the door when Hopper starts peeping round and he shouts at them, hey. And that's going to be a thing with Hopper in this episode, where he asks Joyce for advice about how to handle it, and she kind of passes this off as it's no big deal, they're just, you know, teenagers, they're just kissing, and it's nothing to really worry about. But she does give him some advice on how to handle it, and of course he tries to follow her rule book, the phrases she gives him, but it doesn't go very well. Hopper isn't the most subtle when it comes to these matters, so in the end what he does is he tricks Mike into thinking that it's a relative is like ill, and that his mother has called him, and it's just a way to get him alone in the truck. And he, you know, sort of strong arms in and sort of warns him to stick to his rules, basically. So although it's Hopper going a bit OTT, it's entertaining to watch. But we also see the effect it's like having on his friends, that being Mike and Elle's friend, because they keep sneaking off and to have makeout sessions, and it's like he's been like this all summer. And we see Dustin, who comes home for summer camp. He particularly is isolated by Will is as well. Will is, I think, still reeling from his experience in season 2, and he's sort of missing his friend a little bit because he has been spending so much time with Elle. So just little touches like that are very relatable. Obviously, Lucas and Max are together as well. And one of the big things in this episode and in this season is going to be the introduction of the Mall of America. So, like, the first time malls were introduced, and we see the gang go off to, like, the cinema, and they're all pumped. And the direction from the Duffers in this episode, when they're like walking around the mall heading to the cinema, it just captures that youthful sort of energy. There's plenty of colour and just that sense of being young and actually having all these stores, all this, this big facility. And what I like about this season, which I'm going to talk more about in future episodes, is it does sort of show you the good and the bad of introducing such a thing into like the culture. But it's a really nice scene because they go to the cinema and they're going to see Day of the Dead, but because it's Day of the Dead, because it's like an 18, they have to get someone to sneak them in. And good old Stevie boy, Steve Harrington, is on hand to do that, and that's because he is now working in it's called the Ahoy, which is like an ice cream parlour right near the cinema. There's an entrance right there, so it's like in the foyer of the cinema. Him and sort of his new friend Robin, who also works there, so she's a new cast member this season, played by Myra Hawkes. She's going to have a pretty big role in the season, and they're wearing these adorable but cheesy little sailor outfits, and Steve lets them in the back way so they can get in to see Day of the Dead. And once again, there's just something very nostalgic, very adorable about that. And these kids sneaking into like this X-rated movie, and it's a really great scene because they start watching it and you see a big crowd for it and they're getting really excited, and then the power goes out and they start booing. So I just love how it captures their reactions, the booing and then the cheering once the power comes back on. But what's clever about the power going out, and that's part of it, is it's not just a random thing with the power going out. There's also, it's suggesting that then it's connected to what's going on elsewhere with these experiments and the sort of sci-fi type plots. So it's a good scene to subtly like hint at that, but also it works in the context of what's going on in the cinema. So there's some good stuff with them as a group. The other big stuff is of course Dustin comes back from science camp, and there's a really funny scene with him when he first comes home because they prank him good and proper, because he like, as he's being driven home, he starts raiding around and he wants to get together with them and no one's responding, so he thinks they've all forgotten. And then he gets to his bedroom later on and his toys apparently start coming alive and start freaking him out. He's got this collection of toys that seem to be coming after him, but oh no, it turns out it's Elle once again using her powers in quite a mysterious way, and they're hiding behind the corner, and it's their way of joking and obviously welcoming home, because then they jump out and it's like welcome home and he freaks out. So it's a really funny scene. But the Suzie of the title is because Dustin actually claims to have met this girl at summer camp called Suzie, and she claims that's his girlfriend now. And it becomes this big thing where he's invented like this transmitter, and he says, we need to go up out a certain distance so that we can try it out, and if we do that, I'll contact Suzie and prove that I'm not sort of lying about her. You can actually talk to her. So they need to go up on a big hill, and it's kind of perfect that he's talking about supposedly meeting a girl and having a girlfriend, because of course the others are sort of like, well, apart from Will, but the others are like sort of hitched to someone. And obviously Dustin so far in the series hasn't had the most luck in love, so he's now saying he's got someone and they don't really believe him. But it's a good sort of plot beat where you have them all going up like this journey up on a hill, and it's so that Dustin can prove that Suzie exists. Now the transmitter doesn't work, or it does work, sorry, but it doesn't get, Suzie doesn't answer, so that they come to the conclusion that he's made her up. And it's sort of a theme in this episode of like the group being like pulled apart a little bit. It's almost like as they get closer to like teenage or adulthood, then they are starting to notice girls more, they're starting to pair up a bit more, and it's kind of driving the group apart a bit. Now, I'm sure it's going to become a sort of a theme in the season of them coming back together for like a purpose, but for the time being, they don't believe Dustin and they decide to go. Mike and Al have already sneaked off, so Dustin obviously feeling a bit down by the end of the episode. Will is quite nice to him, but says it's getting quite late, so I've got to go. He's sort of got his own issues, of course. Switching sides for a moment. Oh, actually, before I leave that plot, I will say then the other big thing is that Dustin's transistor radio ends up, hooking into the Russian, their communications, their experiment. So he actually hears them talking in Russian as they continue the experiment. So that's another important thing. There's also some really weird stuff with rats in this episode where, like, somehow these experiments start affecting these rats who start, like, exploding. It's a really graphic scene, actually, for this sort of show, but Stranger Things at times does like lean into like the monster type B movie thing, so that's pretty cool. It's good to have those sorts of moments. So I'll talk about Jonathan, and not a lot with Jonathan and Nancy in this episode, but they're obviously still together, and they're both interns now at like the local newspaper. So Jonathan is like the photographer, Nancy is essentially the secretary, and I guess you might say they lean into this a bit hard, because literally like one of the jerky like reporters at one point does call her like a Nancy Drew, and her name's Nancy, but I think it's a promising direction for the character, because she's complaining in the car how as a woman she's not taken seriously there, and she can't really get away with being late, because one of the things is that they've slept in and they're running late. But for Jonathan it's different, and point well made, Nancy, because that's how it feels. It feels like he won't be subjected to the same level of abuse or obviously sexism as she is, because at one point she suggests doing a story about the mall, like a human interest story, and she makes the point then, although on paper it seems like a great thing for everyone, then at the end of the day it's it's shutting down all these small local businesses, so the death of America almost, and at first they make it look like they're gonna go along with the story, but then they just mock her. So but later on she actually like picks up the phone when there's a call about the rats being like exploding, so that's going to be an opportunity for her, and she's going to be on it. So that's something to watch with Nancy. And Also, just a little thing with Joyce is they do actually sell the loss of Bob a little bit, because she sort of blows off like a thing with Hopper, like he seems to be asking her out or asks her to help him with the Michael situation, but she actually has like this thing where she's remembering Bob, and there's like a flashback to them watching Cheers together and having dinner, and it's this memory. It's a good scene, because again it sort of shows that it's only been a year and she's still like mourning him, and so the idea is that she's doing the exact same thing they used to do. She's watching Cheers, she's having like a microwave dinner or whatever it is, and it's just her reminiscing. So it's a nice little scene. And obviously we get a bit more Billy, and we continue his flirtation with Karen, Nancy's mum, because Billy's now working at the local like outdoor swimming pool, and Karen goes there, and Karen, I will say, considering she's gone swimming, is all, quite a lot of makeup, all dolled up, and it's like something out of like a cheesy sort of B-movie type thing, where this line of women are like laying down sunbathing, and they're just waiting for Billy to come on shift, and it's like this big deal, this announcement when he is on shift, and they all eye him up as he comes out. He looks a lot like Zac Efron in Baywatch, actually, like this, but he's now like a lifeguard, and they've sort of transitioned a bit from Billy being this really unpleasant, unlikable character to him actually just being something a little bit more cheesy, and that kind of character. But the flirtation sort of continues, and he basically asks Karen out. He says, I can give you some private swimming lessons at a different pool, and at first it doesn't look like she's going to go for it, but she's clearly in two minds, and then it's a good subversion actually later on, which this show does so well, because later on it appears as though she's like getting dolled up, and I think she is, but the idea is that she's just like flirting with the idea of going out and meeting him, and just, I think because she's had this sort of spark with him, it's kind of got her excited, but she's just doing it as a thing, as a nice little thing, like getting dressed. But it could be that she's either considering it, or if she might just be dressing up just to feel good about herself. But she doesn't actually go. That's the point they're making. But he, of course, does go. He's confident that she'll show up, and he's driving along. And the dramatic end of the episode is then his car is like knocked off the road, and he's dragged into a barn by a tentacle. So it seems like Billy's done for. It seems like something has killed Billy at the end of the episode. So that's a nice little swerve. And that's episode 1 of season 3 of Stranger Things. Very solid stuff. And I'll say also, as I've watched this again on the rewatch, I actually don't mind this stuff with Billy and Karen. I think it's playing up to like a pastiche of like a B movie, and it's kind of entertaining as I rewatch it, and it's certainly easier to take than some of the crude and nasty stuff Billy came out with in season 2. So I'm kind of alright with it, and it gives Karen something else to do anyway. But that's obviously, that's that stuff, and a pretty cool ending with him being dragged into the barn. So that's episode 1, chapter 1 of Stranger Things 3. I'll be back tomorrow with my review of chapter 2. So thanks for listening. Like and subscribe as always. You can also support me on Patreon, patreon.com/borednow, and keep watching Stranger Things. See you later, guys.